Hey everyone, and welcome to another Victoria 2 money lesson on the Iron Workshop. In this lesson, we'll be learning how to create new country events in Victoria 2. Now, before I begin with the lesson, I do want to make it clear that we will be focusing on the country events and not other types of events. Victoria 2 actually has 4 types of events. We have election events, such as this one here. We have province events, such as this one here. We have major events, such as the house divided event, and we have the regular country event, such as here as well. Now, in this lesson, we'll only be focusing on how to create these country events. I will not be talking about election events or province events, since these events are a bit more complicated, and I would like to keep this video as simple and quick as possible. Alright, so with all of that said, let's get on with the lesson. Alright, so we have about 6 steps in creating our country events. The first step is to create the mod file. This file is important to let the game know where our mod files are located. Now, I have a separate video for that, and I will have a link to that in the upper right corner of the screen. So in case you don't know how to create these mod files, go ahead, watch the video, create your mod file, and then proceed to step number 2, creating our folder and file structure. In step number 2, we'll be creating our folder and file structure. So to do that, I'm going to open the Victoria 2 folder. Now, my Victoria 2 is installed with Steam. It is possible that you're using a different version, like GOG, for example. So locate your Victoria 2 installation folder, and this is what you should see when you open it. Now, in this folder, we have obviously our mod folder, so I'm going to open that as well, alongside the Victoria 2 folder. Now, let me just resize these so we can see both of these folders open at the same time. All right, and in here, I already have my event mod folder. Now, it is possible that you named your folder differently in step number 1. That is totally fine. You can either change it or you can keep it as is. If you change it, make sure to change the name of the folder here as well. Otherwise, things will not work. All right. So now we need to create our folder and file structure. So I'll go into my event mod folder and I'll start copying some files and creating some folders. The first folder that we need is the events folder. So I'm going to recreate that folder inside of the event mod folder. So we'll call it events, the same as it is in here. And from here, I'm just going to copy one of these files. Now, each of these files contains events, and some of these files contain events for different aspects of the game, like, for example, colonial uprisings, or things like world affairs, things like that. Other files are concerned with specific countries. So, for example, in here, we have AST flavor. These are probably flavor events for Australia. Now, for the sake of this lesson, we'll be taking the Nobel Prize event. So that one is located in here. There's a file called Nobel Prize. So I'm going to copy it over to my mod. I'm going to put it in here. And I'm actually going to rename it to something different because we don't want this file to overwrite the existing vanilla Nobel Prize file. So I will just call it new events, just like that. You can give it a different name as well. I don't recommend using spaces in the file names because I'm not sure about Victoria 2, but in other games, it tends to cause some issues. So best to avoid that. All right, so that is all we need for now. Now let's go back into our event mod folder. I'll go back to Victoria 2. Next, we'll need the GFX folder. So let's go ahead and recreate that. All right, I'll go into GFX. In here, there's a folder called Pictures. So we will be recreating that folder inside the GFX folder, just like that. Inside of this folder, we have events. So I'm going to recreate that one as well, just like that. And from here, I'm actually going to grab one of these files. Now, since we've focused on the Nobel Prize event, let's see if there's something that has to do with a Nobel Prize. Yeah, there are a couple of files with there are a couple of files concerned with Nobel Prizes. So I will just grab one of these, for example, literature, and I'm going to put it in here, and we'll be changing this file a bit later. All right, so now let's go back a couple of levels, back to our mod folder. I'm going to cancel this, search in here, and I'll go back into the Victoria 2 folder. The next folder that we need to create inside of our mod folder is the localization folder. So let's just locate it here. It should be right over here. All right, so I'm going to copy it over here. And from this folder, I'm going to grab one of these files. Now, unfortunately, localization files in Victoria 2 are a big mess. They're not as organized as they are in newer Paradox games. So finding exactly what we need could be a bit difficult, but it doesn't really matter for the purpose of this lesson. So I'm just going to grab, for example, this file called event news, and I'm going to copy it in here. And I'm actually going to rename it to new events, just like that. And that is it. We are basically done with step number 2 to create our folder and file structure. And we can now proceed to step number 3, creating our event entry. All right, in step number 3, we will be creating our event entry. So I'm going to go ahead and open my mod folder. I'm going to go to events, and I'm going to open the new events file. Now, when we open this file, you'll see that we actually have a lot of events here. And the first thing that I want to do is to clean up this file by clearing all the other events. Now, all country events in the game start like this: country event equals open bracket. Now, each opening bracket in Victoria 2 and definitely in other Paradox games also needs to have a closing bracket. And if you were to put your cursor in here and click, you see that it highlights in yellow. And this opening bracket has its closing bracket right over here, which means that if I want to keep this event, I'm going to keep this whole section. Everything else can go. So let's put our cursor in here. I'm going to scroll all the way down to the end of the file, just like this. Now I'm going to hold the Shift key on my keyboard. I'm going to click here in the last line, and I'm going to press Delete on my keyboard. All right, so we have now cleared all the other events, and we only have this one remaining. I also want to clear up this in here because we're not actually dealing with the Nobel Prize. If you want to keep these comments, this is fine. Any line that starts with a hashtag will be ignored by the game, which means that you can type anything you want in here. And it is usually a good idea to type what these events are about. So I'm going to clear this line, and I'm just going to put in here new event mod, just like that. You don't actually have to do that, but as I said, it is recommended to put some kind of a comment so that you know what these events are about. All right, so let's go ahead and save the file. And now I want to break down this event entry to see what the various things in here mean. So every country events, as I said, starts with this line that tells the game that this is a country event. Next, we have ID. So every event in the game, and it doesn't matter if it's a country event or an election event or a province event, every event needs to have its own unique ID, its own unique number. And I will talk about in a minute how we can assign this and choose these correctly. But you do need to be careful that you're not creating two events that have the same ID, because that will make both events not work. So pay attention to that. Next, we have news. So this tells the game that this is a news event. That means that this is an event that will have the big background with the picture and the description. Next, we have news description long, medium, and short. So what are these? These are actually used for the newspaper feature in Victoria 2. You are not actually obligated to keep these lines, and you can delete them, but in case you want this event to be featured in the newspaper, then you should put these descriptions in here as well. We will talk about how to put these descriptions when we get to localizing our new event. For now, I'm going to keep it as is. Next, we have trigger. These are the triggers that must be true for this event to fire in the game. Now, this event is an event that is not actually triggered by something, which means that nobody is clicking something like a decision, or there is no event in the game that makes this event trigger. This is a random event that could fire at any time in the game, randomly. And in order to tell the game what are the conditions that should allow it or not allow it to trigger, there are these triggers. So the first trigger is that the country has to be Sweden. This is the country tag. Each country in the game is identified by a tag, 3-letter combination. In this case, it's Sweden. So this event will only fire if the country we're playing, or if the AI is playing, is Sweden. Next, we have year. So the year has to be 1898 or later. After that, we have not. So these are some limitations, which means that the year in the game cannot be 1905 or later. If it is, then this event will not fire. Next, has global flag, noble physics. So this means that there is some kind of a flag that was added into the game. Now, I want to make it very clear, these are not the flags of countries. This is a feature that exists in all Paradox games. Global flags, country flags, these are like these markers that you can put on countries or in the game as a whole to tell the game that something has happened, and then if that thing has happened, then you can make other things happen as well. You can add these, you can remove these, you can change them in a way. I will not be getting into that right now because that is not the purpose of this lesson. The next trigger that we have is war. No, that means that our country that we are playing cannot be at war, otherwise this event will not trigger. Next, we have mean time to happen. Now, mean time to happen is something that Paradox have phased out in their newer games. Now, mean time to happen tells the game when this event is likely to happen, and it doesn't actually guarantee a specific date. Considering that this is a random event, that makes sense. The event is supposed to fire sometime between 1898 and 1905. But when exactly that might happen, that is up to the mean time to happen. Now, I will be honest with you, all my efforts to figure out exactly how mean time to happen works have failed so far. I don't actually understand how the game calculates this exactly. All I can tell you is that you can give it a try and try these modifiers. So for example, we have mean time to happen months 12, and that means that it should fire within 12 months. And then you have these modifiers. So factor 0.9 means that the chance for this event to fire will be higher by 0.9 if the year is after 1899. There is another factor in here that increases this once more if the year is later than 1900. Right? So these are things that you can try, and you will need to play around with them in order to figure it out, correctly and to have the event fire. If this mean time to happen doesn't work for you when you're testing your event, you can try a mean time to happen from other events that perhaps fire closer to what you're trying to achieve. All right, let's move on. Next, we have title. So this is the title of our event, the localization, the text that will appear for the title of our event. And we will get to changing this when we talk about localization. This is the description. This is the description of the event window itself. As I said, in here, these 3 lines are concerned only with the newspaper feature. This description is what you will see when the event actually fires. Next, we have a picture. So this is the picture for our event, and we will get to changing this as well. And this is the option. So this is the button that appears at the bottom of our event, and when we click it, we can cause certain things to happen. We can actually duplicate this in order to add 2 options, and then you can have 2 different things happening when the player clicks. But for now, to keep things simple, I will just leave this one option in here. Each option has its own name. This is a localization key, the text that will appear for this option. and these are the effects of this option. Alright, so let me just once again save this file, and now we will start changing some things about it. First of all, and this is the first thing that you should always change, is to assign a unique ID to your event. Now, this can be a bit confusing because, okay, how can you actually tell if a certain number is taken or not? For example, I want to assign this event the ID 5000. But if the game already has an ID 5000, then it will not work. The two events will clash and the game won't know which event to actually fire. So what we will need to do is to actually take a look at the vanilla game, or maybe if you're doing this for a mod, then obviously you will need to take a look in the event folder of the mod and figure out if this ID is taken. So let's see how to do that. I'm going to go to the Victoria 2 folder, to the vanilla game folder. I'm going to go to events, and I'm going to actually copy the path of this folder. So in here we have the path. If you click here, then it will give you the full path. I'm going to right click, copy, and now in Notepad++, I'm going to go to search, find. Excellent. And in this window, I'm actually going to go to find in files. And in here directory, I'm going to paste the path of the events folder of Victoria 2. And now I'm actually going to search for ID equals 5000 to see if such a thing already exists in the game. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to copy it over here, put it over here, find all. All right, so Notepad++ has finished searching. And as you can see, it actually did find an event that has the ID 5000, so we can't use it. All right, now to spare you hours of searching for available IDs, I can tell you that you can use IDs that are 50,000 and higher. These IDs are not taken by the vanilla game, they might be taken by mods, so be careful. So I will give this event the ID of 50,000. And of course, the next ID could be 50,001, 50,002, and so on and so forth. And this is the ID that you can use for your event. Great, so now that we have the ID, I want to keep it as a news because I do want it to have the big thing with the image and the big background so that it's a beautiful looking event. Next, this is the localization, so we will get to that. Now I want to change some of the triggers. So let's say that I want this event to trigger for Prussia and not Sweden. So I'm going to have to find the tag of Prussia. To do that, we can go to the Victoria 2 folder, we can go to History, Countries, and in here you can type Prussia. This will show you the three-letter tag for Prussia, which is PRU. So let's go ahead and type that. Now, if I want to limit it by a certain year, I can definitely do that. Now, please note that when we are going to be testing this event, we will be using the game console. And when we trigger an event with the console, it actually ignores all the triggers. So we will still be able to test our event, even if these triggers are not met. All right, now there's a couple more things that I can change here. I'm not actually going to go too in depth into all the triggers that you can put here. There are a lot of triggers in the game that you can use, and you can find these triggers in the Victoria 2 wiki. I will have a link to this page in the description of this video, so go ahead and look at that. These are the lists of conditions that you can use in your events. Specifically, we are concerned with country scopes because we are creating country events. So all of these scopes you can use here. For example, you can tell the game to check if the country is a great power. It's called greater power, but that is the trigger for a great power. So only if the country is a great power, the event will fire. So you can use all of these things. Just to keep things simple, I'm not going to change too much in here. I'm going to remove this not, and this is what I'm going to keep for the purpose of this lesson. The same thing goes for mean time to happen. I'm not going to change it. I will leave it as is. if the event doesn't randomly fire for you later when you're testing it, try playing around with these values and eventually you will probably find a value that will work for you. Next, we have the title, description, and the picture, and we will be taking care of these a bit later. And now I want to take care of the options. So once I fire my event, what actually happens? I could gain prestige, which is actually very nice. And I have all of these global flags being set. I don't actually want that. I want something else. So I can take these effects that can happen when I click on the option of my event from the Victoria 2 wiki as well. So let's go ahead in here. I'm actually going to go back a little bit. And in here, there is a page called Full List of Effects. I will have a link to that in the description of the video as well. And these are the effects that I can trigger for my country. So let's see, we can do something like, we already get prestige. We can give ourselves some, yes, we can add an accepted culture. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to paste it in here. And in here, obviously I have to put the culture. So let's go ahead and find our cultures. We have that in Victoria 2, common cultures. And let's say that I want to have the German culture or the North German culture accepted in France. I know that any French people who are watching this will probably want to kill me, but again, this is for the purpose of this lesson. So I'm saving it. And now when we click on the option of our event, we will get prestige and we will have North German as an accepted culture. Excellent. So we're basically done creating our event entry. Now there's a million of things that you can do with triggers and effects for your events. There is no possible way for me to cover all of these in one video. So I highly encourage you to go ahead and give these things a try. Go crazy, give your country various effects, various triggers. The more you play around with it, the more you will learn what is possible, what is not possible. It is possible that you will experience certain crashes when you later test your event, or maybe the event will not fire. That is totally fine. This is all part of the modding process. One tip that I can give you is that you should always make sure that your brackets are closed. This is like the 99% trigger for problems when modding. So if this bracket isn't closed down here by the end, then there's something wrong and your event will not work. Always make sure that every opening bracket has its own corresponding closing bracket. And if that is true, then in most cases you should not have any issues. Alright, so now that we've finished creating our event entry, let's go ahead and create our event localization. Okay, so in step number 4, we will be creating our event localization. So I'm going to open my event file. I'm going to open my mod folder. So let's go back to Victoria 2, mod, event mod. And then I'm going to go to the localization folder and open the new events file. Now this file, as you can see here, is currently associated with Microsoft Excel. Now don't worry about that. It might actually be associated with something different for your installation, like a movie file, stuff like that. All of that doesn't matter. You can just take the file and drag it into Notepad++ and it will open it. If you want to permanently change what opens this type of file, you can right click, go to properties, and then change this section here to the appropriate program like Notepad++, and that should take care of that. All right, so this is the localization file that we copied from the vanilla game. Now, obviously there's a lot of stuff in here and we don't need most of it. So what we're going to do, we're just going to keep the first line in here, and I'm going to remove all the other lines. So I'm going to click at line number 2. I'm going to go to the end of the file, hold the Shift key, and press delete. Excellent. So now we have this one line in here. Okay, and let's see what localization we actually need to create. So first of all, we need our title and description. I will get to these a bit later. So as you can see, there is a naming convention when you give localization keys. This is a localization key. This tells the game that if it wants to find the title for this event, it should look for this thing in the localization file, right? So every event localization key has this prefix, event name, and then the ID of the event. Now, I highly recommend that you follow this naming convention just to keep things clear. So let's go ahead and do that. Our event ID is 50,000. So I'm just going to put it in here. And just to be safe, I'm also going to put it in here. We also have to localize our event option, the button at the bottom. So I'm going to do the same thing in here, right? So this is called event option A, because this is the first option and actually the only option in our case. All right, so now that we have this, let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to copy the title localization key. I'm going to go to this file and I'm just going to put it in here. Now what I'm doing here is just double clicking here. And what Notepad++ does automatically is that it selects everything before this semicolon. And this is what's so great about Notepad++. This is not something that the regular Notepad might know how to do. So let's go ahead and paste our localization key. And now obviously we need to change some of this text. Now these localization keys contain all the languages that are in the game. So if I were to scroll all the way to the right, you see that it also has the localization for other languages. Now, if you're creating your event in English only, what you can do is to hold the Shift key when you put your cursor in here at the beginning after this semicolon, right? Now scroll, hold the Shift key, and you can actually put your ending cursor in here and then press delete. So now if we take a look at it, we need to put our localization here between these two semicolons. So let's just call it test event. Okay, and now it's quite important that you understand what happens in here. So the game goes to this localization key, and then it says, okay, after the semicolon, I expect the English localization. So we have it. After the English localization, there is another semicolon telling the game that now there is supposed to be localization in a different language. I think the next language is German. So if you have German localization, you can put it in here and then type another semicolon. And because we don't have any other localization, we have this X in here, and that tells the game that, okay, after the X, there are no longer any localizations, so I'm going to stop reading this line. So this is why we have it in this format. All right, so let's save this. And now I'm going to copy this line and put it in here like that for our description. So let's copy our description localization key, double click, put it in here. And in here, we can just type the description for our event. I'm just going to type blah, 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 really doesn't matter, blah, 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 blah. Now, if you're creating localization for the first time, please note that you can't use new lines in here. So I can't, for example, press enter and have it like this. You need to keep everything in one line. Okay, this is very important. Now, obviously there is a limitation to how much text you can put, but let's, for example, say that I have a lot of text in here. Let me just type it. And now it's very hard for me to actually make sense of it and see everything. So this can actually complicate things a bit, but you can use a function in Notepad++ called word wrap. And if you click this button, you see that it puts this text in a new line. But what it actually changes is only how it displays this line. It doesn't actually put a new line, and thus it keeps the format of the file intact. Because if I click here again, you see that we're still on the same line, and this is very important. So if you have a really long text and you want to read all of it properly, you can click it in here. You can actually continue to type stuff in here, and Notepad++ will make sure to squish this text so that it fits in your window. But after you're done, I recommend turning it off so that things look exactly as they are and as they should be. Okay, let's save this file. One more localization key that we need to put is our event option. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm actually going to type it manually this time. I'm going to put our localization key, I'm going to put the semicolon, and I'll type happy modding, whatever. Then I'll put the semicolon x semicolon, just like in here. All right, so now we have all the localization that our event actually requires. There's only one thing remaining, and that is the localization keys for the newspaper feature. And the way that you create these is the same way that we've created these, but as you can see, there is a naming convention in here as well. And this time, this is not a recommendation, you actually have to stick to it in order for the game to locate your text properly. That means that you need to put your event description like this, your event ID, and then you have to keep the suffix _news long and _news medium in order for this to appear properly in the newspaper feature. Okay, now I will leave this up to you. You can do it, you can ignore it, whatever you want. I will not be doing this because it doesn't really matter for the purpose of this lesson. I saved the file and we are actually done creating our event localization. Now let's proceed to creating our event image. In step number 5, we will be creating our event image. And this step is actually going to be a bit simpler than the others. So let's open our mod folder. We'll go to the GFX folder, pictures, events. And in here we have a picture called Noble Literature. Now I want to change the name of this file so that it doesn't override the original file from the vanilla game and that it is more fitting. So our event is called test event. So let's go ahead and change the picture here to test event picture. And I'm going to copy this name here and I'm going to apply it in here as well. Now it's best to not leave spaces in the file names. As you can see here, I have underscores for spaces, and that is the best practice when you deal with these types of files. Now, in order for us to edit this image, we will be using a program called Paint.net. If you don't have Paint.net, I'll have a link to the download of Paint.net in the description of this video. It's best to use Paint.net because it will save the file in the same format that the game recognizes. If you have another graphic editing software that you can use, that is fine, but please make sure that it can save files with the .tga format in 32-bit. All right, so to open this file, I'm just going to grab it into Paint.net. I'm going to click Open. And I'm just going to make a small change to it. I'm not actually going to put too much effort into it because that doesn't really matter for the purpose of this lesson. So I'm just going to take this brush and we'll just paint something like this in here just to make sure we see a change when we test our event in the game. Next, I'm going to go to File, Save. I'm going to leave all of these options as they are and I'm going to click OK. Excellent. So now we have our event picture as well, and we can proceed to step number 2, testing our event in the game. Okay, so let's start Victoria 2. I'm going to go to the Victoria 2 folder. I'm going to go to the launcher, double click. In here, I'll select my event mod in the mod selection list, and I'm going to click on Start Victoria 2. Okay, I've started the game as Prussia, and now I need to test my event. In order to do that, I'm going to open the game console by pressing the tilde key on my keyboard. That is the key left to the number 1 key on your keyboard. So once you press that, the console comes up. And in here, we'll need to type the following, event, and the ID, the number of our event, which was 50,000. So let's type that and press enter. All right, so as you can see, we have the name of our event, test event. We have the description and we have our happy modding event option as well. So everything seems to be okay except for the picture. For some reason it hasn't updated, so let's see what went wrong there. Okay, so I've gone back to my file, and what I noticed is that while I changed the name of the picture, I did not save. So that is something that can happen to any of us. So I'm just going to save this file and let's run the game again and see if our picture shows up correctly this time. Alright, so now our event picture shows up correctly and everything seems to be fine. There is one thing that I do want to mention before we finish this lesson. If we take a look at our event entry, there is something here which is actually very bad. And it's not something that I will go too in depth in how you can fix it, but I will give a small explanation. Alright. So the problem here is that this event currently is a random event that could fire anytime after 1898, and there is nothing that stops this event from firing again and again and again. And that is because we don't have any limits on our trigger, right? The only limits are that the year is after 1898 and that we are not at war and that we are Prussia. So as long as we are Prussia and we're not at war and the year is after 1898, the event will just keep on popping up every time again and again. So we definitely want to limit that. Now, there are a couple of ways to do that. One thing that you can do is to add the line trigger only once. Trigger only once equals yes. What this tells the game is that this event will only trigger one time, and that also means that it will only trigger for one country and that's it. If you want your event to trigger for a couple of countries, then you don't want to use this function. But in our case, if I just want this event to fire once for Prussia, that is fine. Now, I can't really tell you all the edge cases where this might be appropriate for you to use or not. Because in our example, if I trigger only once, then that is fine because we are limited by Prussia. But if you were creating an event where you're not limited by the tag, by the country that is being played, that means that your event will only be featured for one country and that is it. No other country will get it again. So trigger only once is perhaps not the best option in other cases. Another thing that you can do is to actually use country flags. So for example, in here, I can use the trigger not has country flag, test event triggered. And what this tells the game is that if our country that the event triggered for has test event triggered flag, then the event will not fire for it. And I can add this flag in the option. So in here, in the option, I can put the effect set country flag equals this flag. That means that if we were to think about the logic of how this will work, let's say that the event now fires randomly for Prussia. Prussia gets the event, they click on the option and they get this country flag. The next time the event wants to trigger, the game gets to Prussia and then it thinks, okay, does Prussia have this country flag? It does. So I will skip Prussia and I will go ahead to the next country, and that country gets the event, gets the country flag, and the event will no longer trigger for that country. Alright, so that is a small tip for you if you want to create these random events that could fire for a couple of countries. And that is all we have today for creating country events in Victoria 2. Now, I know this lesson was a bit long, but Victoria 2 is an older game and modding for it is a bit more complicated than newer games. So that is why this lesson is so long. It's just really important for me that you understand as much as possible and that I can cover as much edge cases as I can to make sure that your events function properly. So that is it for this lesson. Thank you very much for watching. If you found it helpful, please leave a like so that others can learn how to create country events in Victoria 2. Subscribe to the channel to be notified on new Victoria 2 modding lessons, and for other games as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next lesson on the Iron Workshop. Bye bye.